It's February the 4th, 2014. We're south of Muleshoe at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Jack Schuster. Now, what area would you actually call this where your home place is, Jack?
What area?
Yes. It's like halfway in between Needmore and Muleshoe.
Oh, we're 8 miles south of Muleshoe.
Okay, 8 miles south.
5 miles north of Needmore.
5 miles north of Needmore. Now, is this your father's home place? Is this where you grew up?
My father bought this in 23 and started breaking it out in 24. Yes, we've been here ever since.
And
I was born here. Yeah, on this property.
And when did you build this house that you live in now?
The front part of this house was built in 35. That and the Quonset barn was built for $1,200. Then my dad added on to it in the 40s, and then I added on to it in the 60s, and then in the 90s. Yeah.
Now, what crops have you grown out here over the years?
Well, I've grown nearly everything there is to grow in Bailey County. We started out with Sudan hay grazer. Well, we didn't have hay grazer. Then we had Sudan, high gear, cabin corn, wheat, rye, barley, cotton, maize of all kinds, kosher weeds. We were one of the first that went into the Great Plains program in 57 and put in a pipeline here to water 500 acres with a sprinkler line. And you think about, I've grown tomatoes and potatoes and beans and lettuce, peas.
And sunflowers.
No, I never have.
Oh, you never have?
I never have grown sun. My neighbors are sunflower growers.
Okay.
But I never have done that.
Well, I knew there was sunflowers nearby a lot of the time, so.
Well, I got a neighbor who's been growing sunflowers for 7 or 8 years, and they seem to be doing real good at it. Yeah.
So tell me, so your parents came to Bailey County in 1923, did you say?
They came in 24.
24.
They bought the land in 23, and then went back to Russell, Oklahoma. And in the spring or winter of 23, they come out here with 3 wagons and a Model T Ford, and started with my wife's mother and dad and their son, and dad and our daughter, Dorothy. And they all come, and then they lived in the barn. Dad built a little lot down there, and he had a 12 by 12 barn. He lived where they had all the horses he had. And we, mother and dad lived in it from 24 to 27 when they built a little 2-room house right here where we're sitting.
Wow. And what were your parents' names?
Henry Schuster and May. My mother named May. Sally May.
Did people call your father H.E.?
H.E. was his initials. His mother and dad didn't name him when they were born. They waited till the kids named themselves.
Really?
That was the first time I ever heard of that.
Wow.
Whenever my dad and there was 4 brothers and 1 sister, and they sent them to school. They all went to school to the 6th grade. They told the kids, you learn English and Will learn English, and the last 2 did not learn German. The rest of them could speak German, but they never did learn German.
So they were German immigrants?
Yes, they both came from Germany. And then on my mother's side, she's out of the Cherokee Nation. My great-great-grandmother was a full-blood Cherokee. Wow. On both sides of the family.
And so they came to Bailey County from Oklahoma, is that?
Yeah. A little town called Russell.
Russell.
It's ours close to Hollis, Oklahoma.
Okay. I was just in Hollis last weekend.
Well, you go about 12 miles east and 5 or 6 miles north, and there's a little settlement there called Russell. So I don't know how it come by its name. It used to be a really nice little town back in the 30s and 40s, but now it's just dried up to its residents.
Really?
We're just about so many miles apart.
Right.
Enough lucky we're here, everybody was able to either walk to school or ride the horses to school in the 20s.
Right.
And that's how their schools were set up.
Right. Your father, H.E., was one of the first board director.
He was
on the board.
One of the first board directors on REAES.
Right.
And stuff. He helped get the telephone started.
Do you remember what year he first was elected to the board at Bailey County Electric?
Oh, it had to be in the late 30s. We got electricity in 39, I believe. They built the line right here south of town to about where our property is. And then they went east and west, just north of us. And that stayed a while, and we got electricity. We were one of the first in south of town that got electricity. And then they went to building on south a little later on. And it took them, I'm going to say it took them over 10 years to get Bailey County in electricity.
Really?
Yeah. It was all single phase. Everything was single phase. And, but we were able to, when I went to school in the early 40s, they taught us how to weld. And we had a welder and was able to get welding. I did welding and stuff. My dad never did learn how to do it, but I did. And he made his money out of Sudan and chickens and cows. And they would sell the cream and the eggs on Saturday and buy their groceries. And whatever they got, that's what they bought. They didn't buy no more or less. And then Sudan was his cash crop, and then he always had Sudan pasture for his cows. And in the 40s, we was milking 16 cows and by hand, and then he got a milker that we was able to use, and I could do the milking in about an hour then, where it took two of us an hour to do it by hand. So,
do you remember actually when you turned the lights on, when the electricity first came?
I definitely do. We had coal oil lamps, and we had two kinds. We had the one that had just the wick on it, and then the one that had the little silicone deal on it, whatever it was. Well, when they turned the lights on, we couldn't see our shadows anymore. I was so amazed how bright it was. Yeah. Yeah, I still remember that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, we went from the windmill to a electric pump. And then we had lights in the barns. And you also, we still just had lights in the house. That's all you had. You just didn't have enough else to begin with. All this other stuff now has been added as time went on, and then we finally got three-phase and started in the irrigation business in the 50s, and we were right on the line where they built a three-phase, and we was able to have all our wells on three-phase, and then we just began to put electricity in everything, and it was amazing how much, and we do today. You don't do nothing without electricity on the farm anymore. It's been something that I think about what it would do if we didn't have it. It would be so disastrous to us if we didn't have it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we can afford it. Now, back in the 30s, we had a power line going right across the road coming from Sudan, going to Muleshoe, that serviced Muleshoe in Sudan, and Dad tried to get on it. And they told him, said, well, you can't afford the electricity to get on it. So he couldn't get on it, but it was right here at us for years.
Right.
And when the road come through in the late 40s from Sudan to Muleshoe, they moved the line over there on the highway and took it out of here.
Right.
Yeah.
Did I read somewhere else that your father was integral in getting 214 paved?
Daddy became a commissioner in somewhere around 34 or 35. And they was Johnny Williams was a commissioner out at West Camp. and there was 2 more commissioners in the south part of the county. And they all got together with a county judge, and they went to Austin. They had to go to Austin 5 times before they got them to agree to put the highway from Bailey County line to Bailey County line on 214. At that time, you couldn't get to Muleshoe because of sandhills. You'd be lucky if you didn't get stuck because it was so sandy. And the Sudan was the dominant town. But when they finally got that highway put in and everything, well, Muleshoe become the dominant town, and Sudan started drying up. And there was a lot of people that didn't like that, but they still liked the pavement. The pavement made altogether difference. The road is not in the same place. When you get up here 2 miles south of town, the road went east 1.5 miles. And then went into the southeast part of town. And there's still an old bridge over there, if you can see it.
Oh.
My dad had to build that road where the bridge was back in the 20s. And if they wanted water, they'd just scoop down the ground about 2 feet, and the water would rise up, and they'd water the horses. And the water stood there for a long time. And that's basically the only bridge we have in Bailey County. It's still there.
I'll have to go look for it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's just a small bridge, but that is, that's been there forever.
So,
there was a cut in the sandhills that come down through that part of going to town. And that's the reason they went over there to do it.
So is the bridge closer to Highway 84 or closer to current day 214?
It's about, 1/2 mile due east of the substation there in the draw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jack, is there anything else you can think about but what life was like before electricity, and then the early years of getting the difference, the changes that it brought to your family?
I've been amazed at what people lived in those days. The average home was a little wooden structure with a 1x12 and a 1x4 over the cracks and paper glued on the walls. That was a normal home. Most of the homes burnt coal. They would have a little pot-bellied stove, and they had coal oil for the cooking meals, which was very dangerous. A lot of homes burned up because of it. I can't tell you why, but they was. And our neighbor's home down here burned up. They had a little 2-room house, and the neighbors got together, and the next week they built him a home back. And they was a big family, and they were very poor. The people were all the same. They was all very poor. Johnny McMurtry was the first man that come into Bailey County that we know of, and he lived over here 4 or 5 miles east of us. The Davis family, E.L. Davis, lived over here 2 miles from us, and they lived in an adobe house, and it's still existing.
Oh, wow.
It's been remodeled and fixed up, and he built a big barn, and the barn's been remodeled. Seminaker went in and rebuilt it up, spent a lot of money fixing it all back up. It's better than it ever was when it was originally. But those were the best homes. Everybody lived on 160 acres or 80 acres. There was just a few people had 320 or a section.
Mm-hmm. Now, isn't a section south of Muleshoe a labor? Isn't it different than a section north of town?
A section is 640 acres.
Okay, so that's north of Muleshoe, right?
Well, that's south of Muleshoe, too.
Oh, okay.
Your labor is 186 acres. A quarter is 160 acres.
Okay.
Now, a labor can vary. It can go from that up to 200 acres, but there's very few. This road out here, 214, was measured off in the 20s. And A.L. Davis' son, John Davis, helped do it. He was a teenage boy. And they started in Muleshoe, and they wrapped a flag on their wagon wheel. And they started south, and they got the road off. the road is right in town, but it's wrong down here south of us. There's 28 acres across the road that goes to this labor here. Mm-hmm. This is 152 acres, so there's 28 acres over there, making that nearly 200 acres. Mm. Then you get down here where the curve is, it goes back in correction.
Okay.
Then going east on that pavement, 746, that pavement is off. The south labors across there are all about 5 or 6 acres bigger than the ones north of there. Mm. And so it's not all correct. For years when land was $30 an acre, there never was no argument over turn rows. But now, since it's got up to where it's $100 an acre, there's a lot of argument over turn rows. Copley family lived a mile south and a mile west in a half dugout. They was a big family. Well, they didn't farm, but they did custom work. They hoed cotton, pulled bows, drove tractors. Dad hired all the boys, 2 or 3 boys off and on, to help him run his farming operation. And Dad had a man who worked for him from Arkansas in 39. He paid him $1 a day. At the end of the year, he went and bought him a used car. In those days, you paid cash for a car. And he bought a used car, and he married into the Copley family. Well, they didn't have no electricity over there at all, where they lived. And the men, there was 4 boys, I believe, and the father and this son-in-law would walk over here at night, and Dad let them get in the well house. He had electricity in there, and they would plug in their telephone, and they would stand in that well house and listen to that radio for 2 or 3 hours, and then they would take it and go back home, walk all the way back home in the dark. Yeah. Well. Yeah, I thought, I wonder what the women do at home while they're over doing this.
Yeah.
But that was the way it was. When the war came, all those people went to California. Some of them went to Houston, some went to Dallas, and they worked in the war. And then the mother and dad, I never saw them again. I don't think they ever come back. But the boys come back to Muleshoe, and their sons have been very successful in Muleshoe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But in those days, everybody had to work. There wasn't no work. There wasn't nobody to work. The biggest chewing my daddy ever gave me was the Ross family lived right up here north of us, and he was a little bitty man. He had a son-in-law to come back in with his Mr. Ross's daughter, and they lived in a little granary out there that was about a 12 by 12 granary. And I never did see him working. And I said, Dad, what's the matter with that man up there? He's lazy, he won't work. And he chewed me out. He said, no, there's no work. Said the man would work if he could work. But he said, there's no man, no work for that man. Well, in the early 40s, we had a man living over on Dad's place, a mile and a half west. And he had a big family, and he died in his late 40s. And I said, Dad, what was wrong with that man? He said he literally worked himself to death, trying to feed his family. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't no handout, there wasn't no nothing. You did it, and the whole family worked and everything. Right. But all the maize was cut by hand. Cotton was pulled bowled by sack. Sudan, he had a 2-row binder, and he'd cut that up, and they'd put it up in shocks. And then we would haul it in and run it through the thrasher and make a big stack down here. And the cows would eat on it all winter, and then he'd sell the Sudan for cash.
Now, is the Sudan a type of hay?
It's a small, beautiful grain that's long and narrow. It's very pretty. It's a gold-looking color. They come with a red Sudan, and it was an improved, and then everything now is a hybrid. But it's a foliage. It'll grow, when it makes maturity, it'll grow 6 foot so tall. And the foliage can be eaten by the cattle, and when it's growing, well, you just turn the cattle out on it, and they just feed themselves.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But all the old stuff that we grew back then is all history now. I don't know if there's any left anywhere. I've checked out some of it. Nobody knows anything about it.
Really? Wow. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes, yes.
I wonder where we're going to now with all the machinery and everything. When we first started running combines and we cut 2 rows at a time, we had deals, finally got trucks, and we could cut about 30,000 pounds a day with 2-row combiners. Now they got combines that cut that in 30 minutes. Where's the next step? Do you get the width and everything? They've about hit the limits on there, all the width, they're 34 foot.
Yeah.
And everything, and it's going to be interesting to see how they go.